Two, one. We are live. Hello and welcome to Climate Tech Buzz, a podcast channel where we talk to climate tech professionals, CEOs, founders, and VCs from this industry and learn from them how to build and scale successful climate tech companies. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me an exciting guest, Sheida Shahi, who is the co founder and CEO at Adaptis. Adaptis is the decision support software solution for optimal decarbonization planning of existing buildings as part of renovations, retrofits, and reuse. And their platform first analyzes their existing building conditions and then generates automated adaptation design options. Now, as you can see, I'm reading out the description from the website. I should not be doing that because we have the founder and the CEO with me who is going to elaborate on what Adaptis is. So let's welcome Sheida. Sheida, welcome to Climate Tech Buzz. How are you doing today?
Great. Thanks, Ravi. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
The privilege is mine, Shida. Just wanted to, before we get into the meatier stuff, why don't you talk a bit about your career trajectory and then your founding story? What led you to build Adaptis?
Yeah, sure thing. I am an architect, a registered architect here in Ontario, Canada, by profession, studies. I had a Master of Architecture. I was a traditional architect for about 10 years. I worked at different architecture firms across Canada on local and international projects with a focus on existing buildings, adaptive reuse projects. That's where really my passion was. And back in 2017, I was just got more and more interested in the more quantifiable side of things when it comes to decarbonization, material reuse, recycling, what we now call circularity, which back then was a very new term. And that led me back to school. I went back to University of Waterloo, where I did my first two degrees, to the civil department this time, a little bit outside of my comfort zone. And I completed a PhD in civil engineering and with a focus on construction management and circularity engineering. And as part of that experience, I got to learn a lot of new things, and I got exposed to a whole bunch of interesting ideas and pathways forward. And that's where I met my co-founder, Ida Mulay, our CTO. She's a civil engineer. She has a background in sustainability management as well. And she was a couple of years behind. She joined, I believe, late 2019 to do her PhD in the civil department with a focus on waste management optimization. My research early days was very focused on design optimization with my kind of very true to my background. And we kind of over time worked on multiple different projects together. Namely, one that was really pivotal for us was a research project we worked on with the University of Texas at Austin and the Construction Industry Institute, CII, out of Texas. That was a project with a lot of different great partners across the US and Canada, including some big names like PCL, Wood, Floor, Smithsonian from the US as a building owner. And as part of that research project, we got to investigate what it means to implement circularity in the construction sector from very different angles. So it was very research focused, but it was also, we were dealing with real problems in the industry. And we learned a lot as part of that process, Ida and I, as well as our entire research team. And we really understood the need for implementing circularity in construction and the big gap that there really was in the industry. And we kind of regrouped and understood that the research that we were doing was actually, it had a lot of potential for commercialization. And it actually, we were doing market research before we knew what market research was at that time. And that really sparked a lot of different ideas that we now house under Adaptis. From when I graduated mid 2021, obviously it was peak pandemic. And I was lucky to just be exposed to different entrepreneurship, just training programs at the University of Waterloo as part of Velocity's program there. I also participated in a program at U of T, University of Toronto as well. So I was really trying to understand kind of how to really get into commercialization of our research, and these programs really helped a lot. And I ended up getting a grant for a year. That it was an entrepreneurship grant that allowed some flexibility while Ida was still in school. I got that grant, and it gave us some space to figure out how to commercialize. And we're a year and a half later at Adaptis. We have about 25 employees, around 19 full-time staff. The rest are consultants, contractors that we collaborate with globally. We've raised a pre-seed round. We have a whole bunch of grants under our belt, and we're moving ahead full speed.
Excellent. I never knew there is PhD in circularity engineering. I thought circularity has been only in the recent times, and you will have to dumb down many of these concepts because you are a PhD. I'm still new to this industry, so was just curious. Has circularity engineering been in a PhD subject for long?
Because it was the topic of our research, we're allowed to call it a degree in circularity. Back in 2019, my professor, Professor Carl Haas, who is both Ida and I's shared supervisor, he brought up the idea that we should actually have a circular engineering curriculum at the University of Waterloo. And him and I together designed the first graduate curriculum on circular engineering at the University of Waterloo. I taught that course for about 3 years, which led to a whole bunch of other research that continues to live on at the university.
Nice.
So it is a very new term, but the concepts, they're actually pretty ancient. So it's bringing a lot of things that we used to do in design and construction, combining them with a lot of different innovative and new ways of assessing and quantifying that we can get into. But it was a big passion from early days, and our supervisor was actually extremely supportive.
Excellent. So let's talk about the problem that Adaptis is solving. Okay, so it's all started from your research project, and then you thought of commercializing it, and then you won grants and pre-seed. Today, what is Adaptis? What does it solve in the market?
Yeah, so the problem that really drives us every single day is the fact that we in the AEC industry, architecture, engineering, construction industry, need to be doing better to tackle the climate emergency that we're dealing with right now. The construction sector, I'm sure a lot of people have heard the 40% contribution of construction to global warming potentials. But in addition to that, there's a lot that goes on when it comes to waste. So about 60%, that's the number in North America, 60% of buildings are demolished because they're not maintained and they're not adapted at the right time. They have not been designed for an extended life. They've been designed with a short term in mind. They're not easily adapted, and therefore we have no choice but to demolish them. So that's a huge number that can be avoided with better design, better assessments, and better decision making at early stages of a design project, as well as in different stages throughout the life of a building. So that's something that's really important to us, being able to mitigate demolition when we can. And the resulting demolition waste is actually filling up 25% of all of our landfills in North America. So that's a number that we don't often talk about, is how our landfills are filling up and how they're filling up with really valuable materials and natural resources, essentially. So that goes hand in hand with lowering energy use, emissions, operating emissions, and so forth in a building. So we also are motivated by that, and that is something we look at, but kind of in a more holistic, higher level, looking at the three things that are really important to us, which is obviously operational carbon reduction and energy use, embodied carbon reduction, as well as at end-of-life waste management.
Got it. So buildings, demolishing buildings is bad for climate. The longer the lifetime of a building is, the better it is for the climate. Is that fair to say?
They say the greenest building is the one that's already been built, right? So
I see.
The amount of embodied carbon that goes into the production of materials and the construction of a building
Mm.
is very, very significant. So,
Mm.
you can build a very shiny new building that performs in an amazing way, but that is still going to have that embodied carbon that existing building doesn't have. There are
Mm.
many mandates that are coming up across the globe that limit how much you're able to demolish, how much materials you're mandated to reuse, and so forth. So it is something that policy is moving that way. And I gave you some numbers about higher level problems, but how this translates into problems for the AAC industry and essentially building owners that are now have to deal with these additional issues that are being brought up, is it just makes decision making more difficult. So as architects, we're very good at the qualitative side of things, but not so much on the quantitative. And we rely on a lot of different consultants to give us insight on how a design is performing, how can we improve a design process, and so forth. And when you add so many different metrics to the problem, that just becomes very difficult. You deal with many different consultants that say very different things. You deal with lots of data, lots of reports, and how do you combine that? How do you make a holistic decision that can actually be optimized across multiple factors? And that's really where we come in at Adaptis, and we combine kind of a lot of that decision making in one place so that we actually can move forward in a cost-effective way. We can make decarbonization happen in a way that makes sense for building owners, and it's not a burden that at some point they give up dealing with.
Got it. So I'll come to the solution space on how you're solving, and but before that, a thought crossed my mind. There are so many people who are working towards decarbonization and building businesses. Not everybody is a PhD in this field, right? So, does somebody as a specialist, a founder coming as a PhD from this industry, do they have an edge over other founders who may not understand this industry deeply, or is it something that anybody can learn over time?
I have two answers to that question. One is, experience is priority over everything else. Having industry knowledge. Both Ida and I have worked in different companies and spaces, and we have that industry experience, and we complement that with the research that we've done.
Right.
I can't really speak for folks that are fully academic and want to get into the space. I suspect that it will be very difficult because understanding that user, being there and having worked as a consultant really gives a perspective into what the real issue is. And it's easy to understand the problem, but figuring out a solution that can actually scale, I find that would be impossible for me if I didn't have that industry experience. So a little bit, I think it's what the kind of the PhD program really allowed us to do. I wouldn't say it's anything but a couple of years with focused work on a specific topic, which I don't think necessarily needs to be done in an academic space. So I definitely think, and I would encourage others to, it was a decision that seemed like a good idea back in 2017 for me personally, but it's not something I would recommend to everyone. I think there are possibly easier ways to get the knowledge that one is looking for. Second is we have a lot of intellectual property that we have generated as part of that research. The methodologies that we have developed are proprietary to us. And as part of University of Waterloo's IP policy, we as students and researchers get to keep that policy, get to keep that IP. I apologize, and that's what's patent pending at the moment. In that sense, it has given us an edge because we were able to protect the work that we spent time generating, which would be difficult otherwise.
Just curious, are there enough qualified professionals solving this problem? Like I do not meet a PhD from circular economy every day, right? So I'm very curious. Is there enough talent pool that is trying to solve this problem?
It's definitely growing. We've been lucky to find the staff that we really need to move our product and our technology forward. Is it easy? No. It's finding the mix of people. I would say there are a lot of qualified professionals in our field that are great consultants. But when you add that to the need for a product and a startup mindset, I would say that's more difficult to find. So,
Got it.
but yes, I would say there's a lot of great talent out there that is first and foremost passionate and understands that it's a climate emergency, and a lot of kind of their education is focused on how they can actually make an impact.
Got it.
We see that a lot with our master students and the researchers that we fund. We see a lot of passion, and when there's passion, I believe that they will find a way.
Sure. I meet a lot of youngsters, especially the younger you are, the more passionate you are about climate. At least I have found that. All right, great, excellent. Let's move to the solution. You were very good at laying out the foundation of the problem space. Okay, it was also a primer for me. Please let us know how is Adaptis now solving that with your product and with your technology.
Yeah, so our solution essentially combines a lot of the work that different consultants at different times have to do under one roof, and we do that through three main different stages. First is when it comes to existing buildings. I should also mention that we focus on existing buildings as well as high-performing new construction projects. In our portfolio, we're at about 60-40, 60% existing buildings and 40% new construction projects. And the first stage is understanding, when it comes to an existing building, improving the onboarding of a building. A lot of times there's data missing. You never get a perfect picture of an existing building. And focusing on a building by building cases, it's very labor intensive to figure out the gaps and understand the data that's required for accurate assessments down the line. So that's where a lot of our machine learning algorithms come in, and predictive models fill the gaps. We help onboard buildings easier than traditional methods. That's kind of stage one.
What do you mean by onboarding? Onboarding where?
Yeah, so on our platform for assessment.
Okay.
When you want to, as consultants, as anyone, you want to onboard a building, an existing building, you have to understand, first of all, how the existing building operates.
Got it.
From an operational carbon perspective, from the way it's consuming energy for operations, all the way to what materials are there, what is the existing salvage value of those materials,
Right.
What is the potential for reuse and recycling. So we have to understand, this is the work that consultants do every day, we first need to understand what the building, how the building operates, what does it do, and what are the potentials for decarbonization. It's a very labor-intensive process. You rarely get a building where everything is really well documented. As consultants, there's a lot of back and forth to try to understand the conditions of the existing building. We've figured out ways that can improve that process based on kind of running thousands and thousands of buildings. And just we help with, if you don't have a perfect building building perfectly documented, there are a lot of ways to improve that process, and we're tackling that. We help benchmark an existing building, and we help building owners and consultants working on deep decarbonization projects set benchmarks and targets for what they want to do and what they can afford to do with their existing assets. Second is getting into generating design solutions and assessing those simultaneously is the core of what we do. So what that means is when we generate design solutions, that can range from different demolition scenarios, different scopes of demolition or deconstruction for an existing building. It can include extensions to an existing building. For new construction projects, it can be different massing options. So that design generation can mean different things for different types of buildings. And then we run simultaneous simulations, which include energy, embodied carbon, and cost as kind of baselines. And for those, we sit on top of existing engines. We're not reinventing the wheel. In addition to that, we run circularity assessments, which include salvage value assessment, optimization of salvage value at the end of life of a building, different building end of life scenarios under different climate scenarios into the future, as well as end of life optimization for reuse and recycling or other sort of end of life options for materials. And that those assessments are what is proprietary to us, and that's what we like to call the Adaptis engine. And we run those assessments simultaneously with the first three that I mentioned. And the last step is that we present the data in a decision support platform, or kind of large number of simulations get organized in a way that is easy for our users to parse through and understand. We're very transparent about the data that we present. All of that is required for different types of reporting, such as GHG protocol, scope 1 to 3, different types of ESG reporting, and so forth. So we're very transparent about all that data. And through our optimization engines, we can also make recommendations based on, for example, you've ran hundreds of thousands of different scenarios based on the targets you give us. We make it easy for you to parse through. We'll give a handful of options that are optimized by Adaptis, and we present ways that you can see why we made those recommendations for you.
Excellent. Some questions here, since I asked you to dumb down some of them. So when a building is onboarded onto your platform, you conduct assessments. Could you help us understand what does it take to conduct an assessment? Like, do you mentioned about AI ML models that you have. So do you have a certain set of parameters which actually goes through the data points of that buildings and maps those data points and figures out where is the deviation from the benchmark? Is that how it is? Maybe could you explain how actual assessment behind the scene works?
Yeah, so for energy modeling, for example, just an example, as we take the basic geometry of the building, we take up to 3 years of energy bills. This is similar to what a consulting team would need. So we take that and we generate the baseline based on the data that we get, and then we, based on the baseline, then we suggest improvements, right? When it comes to that, data is usually easy to get, but when it comes to circularity assessment, understanding the salvage value of that existing building.
What's the salvage value? Sorry, what's the salvage
Salvage
value?
value is so you have an existing building, for example, and there is inherent value in the materials in that building. For example, you have a timber building. That timber building is 100 years old. There is value assigned to certain members of that building, elements of that building, based on the quality that they're in, based on the potential of their deconstruction. Can they actually be taken apart, or are they going to get ruined in the process? And are they actually reusable? If we salvage them, are they reusable? Is there a market for it? Is anyone going to buy it? Or are you going to have to recycle it? So it's a combination of, it's a very simplified definition. But those are things that we can assess. And for the data that we need geometry of the elements. We need their location. We need their relationships of materials together. And we need the conditions that they're in to put into our model. And that's a tall order. That's a lot of data that doesn't always exist. So we have to manipulate a lot of that data, have to have run so many assessments to have learned. For example, if we get a model where a beam is like, you have a column and then you have a beam and they don't touch, we need to understand that they are actually related to each other, right? Otherwise, we would need a perfect model, which we're never going to get. So that's just an example of where we fill the gaps.
Excellent. Now, coming to recommendations. So when you give the recommendations, what is the entire lifespan of the recommendations being implemented and the results coming in? How long is that timeline are we talking about?
For assessments, do you mean?
Yeah, so you do your job. Your platform does your job. You do the ESG reporting. You do the recommendation on how can they bring, say, I think there is energy labeling, right, of the building, or there is some kind of labeling on a spectrum where you say that, okay, this is my recommendation. If you improve these things, your building goes to the greener spectrum, right? So how long does it take for the owner of the building to implement these recommendations before they can see results? Or maybe a right question would be, what is the kind of conversation that you have with your clients, so that they have practical results coming out of working with you?
Yeah, so uh, maybe a helpful answer would be to tell you kind of where we come in into the process
Right.
and
Yeah.
how we stay involved. We like to come in very early days of a project. That's really where we can have the most impact. Typically, that's day zero of a project. We have had examples of building owners, kind of our repeat customers coming to us even before they purchase a building to understand
Mm,
the potential of, if, for example, the question that gets posed is, if I can't afford to successfully bring the emissions of this building down by 40%, which is required of me, then I
mm,
can't afford to purchase this building, right? So that's
right.
as early as we would like to
Mm,
get involved, because that's where the most impact is. We do stay involved throughout the design of the process of the project. Our users change over time. So in early days, when we were working on kind of very early days, sometimes we brought on before the consulting teams are kind of assigned or brought on. So we help building owners with early stage decisions of, should you even demolish this building? Can you extend it? What should you do, kind of at
mm,
a high level?
mm,
And then when the design teams do come on, when there's an architect, there's a mechanical engineer, there are different contractors onboarded, uh, we stay on and provide feedback and insight to them to help them with their design and specification process.
right.
And kind of the answer to your question is really, it's not based on, it's based on a construction timeline, right? And that differs for a variety of reasons. Um, it can be financing, it could be different targets, it could be general capital planning. So sometimes we do a project, we run an assessment for a project, and the project is not going to be implemented until
Mm,
the next 5 years for a
right.
variety of reasons.
Yes.
Sometimes we run assessments and it goes into construction in the next 3 or 6 months, right? So that's not really dependent on us. It's more on a higher level project basis, but we like to stay involved early days throughout the design process. Maybe that leads to kind of a business model kind of explanation, but we do like to stay involved during construction for validation.
Right.
To your answer to your question of when do they see results is for circularity, waste management, material reuse, and recycling, it is through the construction or demolition process.
Mm,
So the data that we get from construction management companies on what was actually salvaged, uh, what waste went where, was it
mm,
actually reused, all of that data gets to us through construction. And for on the operational carbon side, after a building is built, we can intake energy bills up to 6 months after occupancy and
mm,
validate that against our results.
nice. And like, does somebody hold you accountable? Like, for example, if you give a certain recommendation, do you actually present whether those recommendations are actually giving the right results? Is that how
Well,
does it work?
yeah, well, different platforms are different. At Adaptis, we are a team of professionals. We
Mm,
are registered architects, professional mechanical engineers, and as part of our larger team, as individuals, we're accountable to do accurate work. So
okay.
that's kind of, we have our professional duty to deliver based on standards. So that is what we take very seriously. In terms of staying accountable, it's just there are industry standards similar to how energy modeling company or any sort of environmental consultant, for example, would work. The liabilities are very similar. Uh,
Right.
and there are limitations between simulation and reality, which the standards are based on. So we have to ensure that as a whole, at our company and our simulations, they fall within a acceptable deviation from reality. It's just how
Mm,
it is. When it comes to embodied carbon and waste, it becomes a little more difficult to predict
mm,
because there are more moving targets. A lot of different things happen during construction. It's based on a lot of manual work. For example, is a laborer actually trained in accurate deconstruction? That's out of our control, right? Um, we make our best recommendation. We run a lot of different probability scenarios, and we provide different kind of results based on different certainties that our building owners can kind of understand. This is what's possible in a perfect world. This is what's possible in reality, and there are different scenarios from there of if things go wrong. And that's the science of construction management. It's never perfect.
Got it.
One could argue it's not really a science.
I'm very curious to know about why would somebody want to work with you? Is there a sense of urgency for them to move towards greener building? Are they under regulatory pressure, or are they do they have to meet certain targets and stuff like that? Could you help us understand that motivations to work with you?
Yeah, so a lot of our customers come to us because they now have to deal with more stringent mandates. And the main question is, how can I hit the targets within my budget? And because we are able to simulate a large number of solutions, our search space is very large. We can assess any sort of scenario for you in a very reasonable amount of time, and all associated with a cost. Therefore, our building owners can be pretty certain that the results that they get is actually, if you have a specific budget, let's say you have $20 million to retrofit a building, how is your $20 million best spent? Is it the most expensive window with the most expensive HVAC system and the most insulation you can get? That's likely never the case. It's a matter of the best scenarios based on the quality of the building, the orientation, the climate it's in. So it's a combination. It's a perfect mix often, not necessarily the most expensive of all the different items. So it's finding that right balance takes consideration of a large number of what ifs, right? And that's really the value that we can bring on top of kind of everything else that we do, is that we can really ensure that our building owners, the stakeholders that are making decisions, are actually getting the whole picture at once, and there are no surprises. And there's no way to do that in a manual way. You really need to look at data at a large scale. You need to be running a large number of simulations to be able to optimize.
Got it. You mentioned about targets. Could you explain what targets mean?
Yeah, so targets could be there are different granting avenues at the government level, for example, in different countries and different places, and they could be based on incentives. For example, for an existing building, a certain percentage better than the existing. For a lot of places, it's mandated. You have to do, if you want to retrofit a building, you have to do X percentage better. For new construction, that's based on average national energy building codes. For example, if you want to be incentivized for, I don't want to give specific examples, but just for understanding of your audience, but for a new construction project, it's a matter of doing a certain amount better than what is expected as part of code. So that's what we mean by targets. When applied to energy, it's percentage of energy use reduced. When it comes to waste, it's a percentage of waste diverted from landfills. California for example, has very strict mandates on diverting waste from landfills. As of 2024, they've recently announced that, if I'm not mistaken, 45% of materials from an existing building of a certain size have to be reused, not just diverted, not just recycled, but reused, right? So how do you meet, that's a target. How do you meet that target within your budget?
Are you happy with these regulatory targets being set, or are they stringent enough for real impact on the ground, or there are ways to find your way out of it and stuff like that? What's the scene on the ground?
Yeah, well, we're a big fan of policy. We think that really that's what's going to move the market, and we're all moving in the right direction. Some places slower than others. In Canada, for example, we're seeing a lot of incentives, less policy implemented. We're getting there. In the US, there's a lot of more strict policy
Right.
that's being implemented. In Europe, obviously, they're way ahead of us in terms of policy and mandates. Um, we think that, like, just based on experience and what we see, is that if you implement a policy that is going to have strict financial shortcomings for a building owner, it is less likely to be implemented. Doesn't mean that people will find a way around it. It just means that, for example, you have an existing building. If the policy doesn't match the financials for that project, there's a very likelihood for that building to be abandoned, right? If someone can't afford to if, for example, there's a mandate to reuse 45% of this building, but this building is falling apart and there's no potential for reuse, why would a
Mm.
building owner buy that building, right? So
Mm.
we think that bottom-up policy is really effective. When we run assessments on a large number of buildings, we're starting to see a lot of different patterns to policy. Some
Mm.
buildings have potential for up to their 70% of their materials to be reused in a cost-effective way. The
Right.
building owner can actually salvage value from doing that. So they're incentivized from a financial perspective to do it.
Mm.
Some buildings, it doesn't make sense to reuse more than 20% of their buildings. There's asbestos,
Mm.
there's mold, there's, the materials aren't of a high quality. Then you're forcing that building owner with a low quality building to reuse 45%. That means they're going to be taking a huge hit financially. And then you have the other building where there's a huge potential for reuse, and you're only expecting them to reuse 45%. So
Mm.
top-down policy is very important because that's what moves things forward at a scale. But then when you start to look at a build, it's also important to run these assessments on a case-by-case basis
Mm.
and have some flexibility so that at scale, uh, circular economy and circular construction, economy is a huge part of it. Finances are a big part. There's actually huge value in building in a circular way. There's huge value in building robust supply chains. And we need to always keep our focus on the financial benefits of diverting waste, reusing materials, creating jobs. There's a huge, huge potential. But if you put top-down policies and you force people to operate in a certain way that doesn't make financial sense, it's kind of contradictory to the whole point.
This is turning out to be such a valuable conversation, at least for me. I'm sure this is familiar conversation for you on daily basis. So what you're saying is there cannot be a one size fits all policy that you can just apply on a blanket with everybody, but it depends upon case to case basis. So do you, by virtue of working on the ground, do you also work with the policymakers, give them or educate them, and so that top down and bottom up joins hands together?
It's a big part of both Ida, my co-founder, and I's passion to be able to implement that. It is
Hmm.
not our main focus. We are here to move the industry forward. I hope the policymakers out there, we've tried, and we will continue to try. But we think that if the industry can do a lot on its own, when something makes financial sense, building owners are actually happy to do it. So we're more motivated to find that, let the policy folks do their job, and hopefully we can meet somewhere in the middle.
Nice. Help us understand. I'm also being mindful of the time here. How do companies like you make money? Like, what's the kind of business models? Is it tied to some kind of value that you bring into your customers? Is it value based pricing? Help us give a sense of how do you
Yeah,
what's the business model?
our business model right now is based on a B2B SaaS, software as a service, working with building owners directly. The value that we can, kind of our value add for our building owners is, for example, we've proven that in a lot of our projects, we have brought or we have unlocked 30% or more in return on investment for our building owners. Because of the reasons I mentioned earlier, they are able to make decisions not because and decarbonize and unlock, for example, certain grants within their budget that they previously thought they couldn't, right? Because they hadn't been exposed to all the different possible scenarios. So increasing return on investment for our building owners, so that and a lot of times that translates into better performance. A lot of times building owners are motivated to do better if they can afford it, right? So sometimes, for example, they'll start with saying, hey, I need to be 40% better than the National Energy Building Code. When they see all the different scenarios and when they can see that with a little bit more capital expenditure, maybe they can be net zero ready sooner than they thought, right? So unlocking those values for them and giving them a holistic perspective on not just right now, but on different climate scenarios, de-risking their properties over time, and kind of how they can plan for their decarbonization in the future, because mandates will change over time. Right now, we're focused on reduction in energy and limiting embodied carbon in Canada, at least. Policies on waste management are coming, as I mentioned. And then that's where, after we have a hold on that, after 2030, that's when the policies for net zero energy, net zero carbon, that's where they're going to kick in, right? So if you're retrofitting your building right now, you're likely not going to retrofit it again before 2050. So you need to be mindful of the different risks that are coming your way. So I would say that's the main value, front and center. And then the other items are that I mentioned multiple times, we are able to generate and simulate a large number of solutions that often leads to higher quality assessments than what is manually possible. We are 95% faster. We get our simulations done in a matter of days instead of months and months, going through different types of consultants. And from a kind of cost of assessment, on average, we're about 8 to 10 times more cost effective than traditional teams.
Excellent. Very, very impressive. Help us understand how is this space evolving, because you are at the cutting edge. You're one of the frontiers in this field. Where is space for even more disruption and innovation happening in this space?
Yeah, as we move away from energy use reduction, right, as kind of an industry, where everyone's starting to get a hold and understand energy use, ways to reduce it, electrify when needed. So we're getting better and better at that. As we kind of get going on that, when that is under control, kind of our deadline for that is 2030 across kind of the globe, different mandates, but essentially we need to get there by 2030. After that, or kind of more progressive concerns are on embodied carbon policy. Right now, we're capping a lot of things, but the embodied carbon reduction, reuse policies, and then moving towards new construction. Right now, again, we're dealing a lot with, we're very reactive to the problems that we have. We need to start getting more proactive about, okay, how do we now design a new construction building so that it is circular, so that we can reuse it at the end of life, so that it is adaptable throughout different stages of its life? How can we reduce demolition down the line at different stages of maintenance and so forth? So I see a lot. That's kind of why we've seen circularity really pick up in popularity over the past many years. I would say after 2018 onwards, there's been a spike. And we talk about circularity a lot in spaces outside of construction, circular fashion, circular business models when it comes to appliances or different components of a building even are becoming more and more common, but looking deeply at what actually it takes to develop, maintain, and operate a circular building is where, at least I hope, this space will evolve, and I'm seeing really good signs.
Excellent. What do the next year or so? I would not say couple of years, because you're still in the early years of your business, but how does the next year look like for you?
Yeah, so over the next year, our team is really focused, heads down, on improving and completing our platform and our technology from different perspectives. We're very new. We officially started in March of 2022. So we're still early days. We have a lot of work to do. So over the next year, you'll see a lot from us in terms of improvements to our platform, onboarding different types of building owners, different types of buildings, on our platform and just extending our reach. That's what we're really focused on, so that we are ready to scale globally in 2025 onwards. So we're really heads down, focused on product.
Excellent. Well, this brings us to the end of a very, very fascinating and thought-provoking conversation with Sheida. Sheida, thank you for your time and giving us your wealth of knowledge, and all the best. We'll keep an eye on how your platform grows. And if possible, once your platform matures to a point where we can have fresh and new insight and conversation, we'll have you again on our podcast. Thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
See you around. Bye bye.
Bye.